Today I want to invite you to come into my biblical time machine, which we do sometimes. We go back quite a ways in history. Let's go all the way back to the year 203. That's a ways back, is it not? At that time, Christianity has been expanding and spreading. It's been growing now for about 170 years. And it has moved from around the area of Jerusalem and the Mediterranean up into Asia Minor, which is Turkey, present-day Turkey, and across to the west to Greece and to Rome, and then it drops down into northern Africa. And that's where we'll go today, Carthage, Africa. A 22-year-old noblewoman named Perpetua has been arrested. Now, Christianity is not illegal at this time, and Perpetua has just been baptized, so she is a new Christian. The Roman Empire has decided that there are too many Christians, so we can't make them all illegal, but we can make it illegal to become a Christian, to be converted to Christianity, to go through catechism and to be baptized. And that is what Perpetua has done. She has become a Christian, herself and 4 others. And she and they have all been arrested, and they are waiting in a Roman jail to find out what their sentence will be. Now, this group of 5 is just a great cross-section of what the Christian community looked like at that time. Male and female, slave and free, literate and illiterate, old and young. All 5 are from different walks of life, but they found commonality in their faith. They love the way of Jesus. So Rome is holding them, but also offers them a way out. All they have to do, if they want to be released from prison, is to declare that Caesar is Lord and to offer the proper sacrifice to the Roman Empire, to Caesar, to prove that they are devoted and loyal to the power structure that's in place. Perpetua refuses to do that. Her father goes to the prison 3 different times, even bringing her infant son, trying to persuade her to recant, do whatever it takes to get out of prison. But Perpetua won't do it. She has found empowerment in the way of Jesus. As a woman, she never belonged to herself. She always belonged to her father or her husband. She never had autonomy or independence, but now Jesus has taught her that the last will be first and the first will be last, that there is no male or female, there's no slave or free, but we are all valuable in the sight of God. And she cannot let that go. She alone holds her future in her hand, and she can decide what will happen to her. And so she and the other 4 decide to stay in prison. That is persecution, friends. And that is what our reading from 1 Peter is about today. We see the word suffering there a lot, but it's actually about being persecuted. So let's get just a little bit of context. This letter, called 1 Peter, is one of 2. It is called the letter to the suffering church because it is about suffering. And it's about how God will meet us in suffering and redeem our suffering. And it's meant to encourage us. Now, if you were a traditional theologian or scholar, you would say Peter the fisherman wrote this letter, and he wrote it in 63, 2 years before he was martyred, to encourage other Christians to continue on the path, teaching and living by the way of Jesus. Now, the problem with that is that Peter spoke Aramaic, and he was an uneducated fisherman, and this letter is written in classical Greek. So modern scholars dispute that. They don't know exactly who wrote it, but its purpose is the same. It's still to encourage us when we are suffering. And it also tells us to be careful about how we suffer. Now, what I want to note to you today is that I thought that I understood persecution until I started studying this text. And I realized that while we all have a good idea of what it is, what it looks like, and how it operates in the world, I needed to brush up on all those things. So you get to follow my meanderings today as I uncovered some blind spots that I had in my mind about suffering. For example, when we here in 2026 look back at people like Peter and Perpetua and the others who were put into prison and later executed, We believe that they are persecuted because of what they believed. But that is not the case. The empire generally does not care what you believe. If you believe the earth is flat, nobody in Washington, D.C. is going to care, right? You can believe whatever you want. The problem is when your actions show that you are undermining the power structure. So it is not what you believe, it's how you live. That's what gets you into trouble, and that's what causes persecution. So Perpetua and the others are living in this community that is teaching them that if you are a woman, you're just as valuable as a man. If you are poor, you are just as valuable as someone who's wealthy. We live in community. We share everything. If somebody is being hurt, we all stand up together for them. And that is seen as a threat to the empire. And that's what gets people persecuted. So that was my first wake-up call, and after I thought about that, I realized that there were some other things that I didn't quite understand. For example, what exactly is persecution? Now let me tell you first what it is not, because I like to follow a lot of very conservative voices on social media just to see what they're saying, and there are a lot of cries of persecution. So let me tell you what persecution is not. It is not when you put something on Facebook about Jesus and someone doesn't like it. That's not persecution. It's not persecution when you walk into a store in the month of December and the store clerk says, "Happy Holidays," and not "Merry Christmas." That is not persecution. Does anybody remember the red cups at Starbucks? They took all kinds of flack for having red holiday cups and not Christmas cups in the coffee house. If you are on a crowded elevator and you say to yourself, "This is a great opportunity for me to make converts to the way of Jesus, and I'm going to lead everybody in this elevator in the sinner's prayer and have them all baptized before we get to the ground floor," and instead somebody gets angry at you and maybe punches you in the face, you did not take one for the team. You do not get to blame Jesus for your bad behavior. If you're obnoxious, you're just obnoxious. That is not persecution, okay? There's a line in our reading. I had Betty read this even though it was not in our lectionary text, but it says, don't suffer for being a murderer, don't suffer for being a mischief maker. If you do those things, you're on your own. You don't get to blame Jesus when somebody calls you on your bad behavior, right? So that's not persecution. Persecution is a systematic oppression of a person or a group in response to their religious practice. All right, it's a systematic oppression. Now, there's a couple of problems that I can see with how we interpret our reading and the time in which we live. And one is that if you are a white Christian in this space today, you probably have not really been persecuted. We get to come to church, we get to practice, we help the poor, we do all the things we do, and nobody stops us. We don't go to prison. We don't ever get persecuted to the point of suffering for our faith. If you're a white Christian, that's one problem, because this text says you will suffer if you follow the ways of Jesus, these subversive ways of undermining the power structure. You will suffer, or not. Now, there is another group, though, in the United States that is absolutely certain that they are being persecuted for Jesus, and they're not either. These are the white evangelical Christians who like to say they are being persecuted. This is the group who is right now the most powerful voting bloc in our country. They are in charge right now of the administration, the Supreme Court, Congress, and many state houses. And yet, they feel like they are being persecuted. These are the folks who don't want to bake a wedding cake for a gay couple, right? So when they feel persecuted, they're actually being challenged for the ways in which they are acting with exclusivity and not the inclusive way of Jesus. They think that women should no longer have the right to vote. This is a true thing that is happening today in our nation. They are opposed to people of color. They are overtly racist. And yet when we call them on their behavior, They cry persecution, but they are not. They are actually the powerful. The powerful cannot be the ones who are persecuted. So when they read this text, they see themselves in the role of that underdog who is trying to save the world for Jesus. And we see ourselves and other marginalized peoples pressing back against the structure of their power. And that makes readings like this one really difficult for us to comprehend. Somebody is being persecuted, but it's not generally white Christians. It's many other people groups. Now, there is one line in our reading that I want to call attention to because this also becomes confusing. Betty read for us that the devil is prowling around, looking for somebody to devour. And as I always tell you, whenever you see lines like that in Scripture, it is not a guy with a red suit with horns and a pitchfork. That is not the devil, okay? In this reading, according to theologian Miguel de la Torre, who's also a liberation theologian and scholar, he says the devil in 1 Peter is clearly a reference to the empire. It's the Roman Empire. They are the only ones who are prowling around looking for you. Nobody cares what you believe, and for the most part, if you don't do a whole lot, they don't care about that either. But do something to undercut the empire, and you will be noticed. For example, maybe you just decide one day you are no longer going to pay your property taxes. How long do you think it will take before somebody notices? They will notice. Anything that undercuts the power structure or undercuts the flow of income is going to call attention, right? So the devil here, I want to be really clear, is not some demonic element that's flying around trying to confuse us and scatter us and causing us to suffer. The empire is exerting power. And we as Christians need to be standing up and supporting the marginalized as Jesus taught us to do. Now, the other thing that there are many, many points here, and I'm sorry, you really truly get to ramble with me in my mind this week. One of the things that we have been taught generally is that persecution is happening somewhere else. It's happening overseas. It's happening in other countries where there are a handful of Christians and everyone else is of another faith and they have to hide, and we are all taught that. America has an amazing knack of pointing the finger at everybody else and never looking inside. Because there is plenty of persecution right here in the United States. Just ask a black Christian. Ask someone from our Jewish community. Ask a woman or ask a queer Christian. And they will tell you all about the persecution they have suffered. But no one or very few churches and denominations will stand with them and call out the way of Jesus. And even when we do it, it seems to fall on deaf ears. But this is what 1 Peter is encouraging us to do, to live the way of Jesus. Not just say, I believe in Jesus, not just go to church, but to actually act in a way that may bring suffering on you. And know that God has your back, that you are not alone, that there are Christians all over the world who are suffering in the very same way. But they are not suffering from a place of power. They are always the marginalized. Now, when we left Perpetua and the other Christians with her, they were waiting to find out what would happen to them in the face of their arrest and their imprisonment. And Perpetua's brother went to her and asked her, do you think you're going to get out of this alive? And she had had a dream. And in her dream, she said that she saw a ladder extending from this earthly plane up to a higher spiritual place. And the ladder was adorned with weapons, metal knives and swords and all kinds of sharp, terrible things. And at the base of this ladder is a dragon. And she said in her dream, she stepped on the head of that dragon and went up that ladder. And so she told her brother, I'm pretty sure I will be executed. But she was joyful to do it. Because at that time, the highest form of devotion you could show to Jesus was to be martyred. There was nothing that said you were devoted to Jesus and to the way of Jesus more than giving your life as Jesus also did. Now, the audience, actually, let me back up and say this. The Roman government did not generally execute the way you expect them to. They would simply sell their prisoners to the gladiatorial arena. And they would take care of the execution. And it would be Saturday night entertainment, bring your families, we'll serve popcorn. And you thought video games were bad. They're filling these auditoriums, these arenas, so that prisoners will be executed. But this audience is not ready for Perpetua. When she comes out, she is so radiant with peace and joy. She walks out with her head held high. She actually is the first female martyr. She walks into the auditorium, and they release a wild beast which gores her, and she does not lose this beatific look on her face. Then they send a gladiator in to finish her off. And he does not strike a fatal blow. So she takes the sword in her hands and guides it to her throat. Now she dies, obviously. And she is remembered as the first female martyr. She and another woman who died that day, Felicitas. They died because it was the highest form of devotion that they could possibly give to show how the way of Jesus had empowered them and changed their lives. They could not go back. Now, the face of devotion has changed over time. No longer are people martyred for their faith, at least not here in the United States. As the centuries go by, the new face of devotion is celibacy. If you want to truly be devoted to your Lord and Savior, you will be celibate. You will be a priest or a nun. You will join a monastery. You will be a monk. You will live maybe like the desert mothers and fathers, away from people. You might even take a vow of silence. There were other ways to show your devotion. Now today, we are not being called to be martyrs. And for most of us here, the celibacy ship has sailed many years ago. So that leaves me with this question. If this suffering, if persecution, if all of this has to do with how devoted we are to the ways of Jesus, how will you show your devotion? What ways does our church, in our time and place, how do we show our devotion to Jesus?